Barb, Maple PhD, and I wanted to go over my top 3 gimmicks in games. Here I'm talking about things that are in a game that could maybe have been done in a simpler or less flashy way, but I happen to love how it worked out in these games, and they, to me, just add something that makes it extra fun. So here we go with my top 3 gimmicks in games. My number 3 is the dice tower in The Spill. The Spill is a game that you are cooperatively trying to help recover animals, save animals, and move back the oil from a spill that has happened from an oil rig. In the center of the game, there is this giant tower that represents that rig. And at the beginning of each turn, you are rolling a number of dice into that. And where they land and the numbers that they land on define where they go out into the ocean represented on the board. This probably didn't need to have to be this way, but it adds so much to the game. You get this feeling of an oil rig being there. You get this randomness of you don't know where the oil is going to come out. You're trying to kind of beat it back wherever you can. You're trying to save the animals that are going to be affected by it. But then you never quite know where it's actually going to land on the next person's turn and whether or not you've set yourselves up to do the best you can in this game. It's also the bane of my existence because whenever you're rolling those dice, they never land where you want them to. But it is super fun to just throw those dice into this tower and see what happens. So for those reasons, The Spill and its dice tower is my number 3 gimmick in a board game. My number 2 is The Adventures of Robin Hood and the little flippy bits that are on the board. I don't know what they're called. But when you set up a game of The Adventures of Robin Hood, I'm not going to give away any of the story or any of the spoilers, but when you set it up, the board has these little cardboard pieces in cutouts that you can flip over depending on what you need in the game. The most common thing for these, and this isn't really a spoiler, is that there are guards that are posted all around Nottingham. And so often you're flipping them over just to show that there's a guard in this area, and if one of your people happens to be there, they might get caught by that guard. But also at the beginning of the game, you might flip over some things you haven't seen before because they are part of the story that you need to interact with before the end of that campaign game. Or maybe they're just something that you can interact with, but each time it changes. The meaning of it will change depending on which game you are playing at that time. And so this was a really fun way for them to add things to the board, make it super simple. You just flip them over at the beginning of the game or flip them over when you interact with them. And it's also very satisfying when you flip it over and stick it back in there and it just fits perfectly. So for those reasons, The Adventures of Robin Hood and the flippy bits on the board are my number 2 gimmick in a board game. And my number 1 is Turing Machine and the computer punch cardy things that you put together on each turn. So Turing Machine is a purely deduction type game where you decide what puzzle you're going to play. And it tells you a number of questions that you put on the board, things like the number of ones that are in the code at the end of that you're trying to decipher, or which number might be higher or lower, how many odd numbers there are, that sort of thing. And then you also play out these cards that go with it that you will use in order to test your questions. So each turn you're going to pick 3 numbers, a 3-number code, and you're going to take these cards that have little punch outs in them. And you're going to line those cards up, and then you will decide which question you're going to test. And you will pick up the corresponding card that goes with that and slide it behind your punchy cards. And if there's a check mark in the one open spot on there, you know that you have tested correctly. So maybe there are 2 odd numbers in there and you had 2 odd numbers in your test. Or there might be an X. So maybe there actually aren't 2 odd numbers. There's either 1 or 0 or 3. You don't know. And there will be an X in that position. And so for me, the gimmick is lining those cards up and placing this behind it and getting that check or minus. You could do this in a lot of different ways. You could have done it with an app, probably. But honestly, it's just so much fun to line them all up secretly behind your shield, see if there's that plus or minus in there, and then go on to the next one. And so for that reason, just the pure joy of lining these punch cards up, Turing Machine is my #1 gimmick in a board game. How about you? Do you have any games that you love that have some kind of a gimmick, something that maybe could have been implemented in a simpler way or a less flashy way? Tell me about them in the comments below. I'd love to hear about them. Otherwise, you can like and subscribe to my channel so you know when my next videos come out, or you can find me on Instagram and Blue Sky as MeeplePhD, and I have a blog at meeplephd.com. We'll see you next time.